today. So it won't be how necessarily females should eat around their 28-day cycle. It's just in general, hormones out of the many we have might have an effect on the training that we're doing. So it's an absolute minefield, hormones. And just to firstly say that I'm not a doctor, so if you do feel that you've got a bit of an issue with hormones, you need to see a specialist. So I can advise on nutrition and training to a certain extent for better hormonal healthy function, but because of scope of practice, etc., and I am a stickler for scope of practice, then you need to go and see somebody specifically about any problems you've got. But Katie and I spoke many times about hormones. I'd say in the last 5 or 6 years, I've become way more in tune with how I operate. So I know, for example, overtraining, too much cardio has a direct effect on how I'm feeling and also my muscle mass. And there are certain times in the month I know that I can really get like PBs, get super strong. There are other weeks where I just know that it's better to chill out. And the quicker that men and women can get to grips with listening to their bodies, the better that is for long-term health, because whether you think you can just keep going and keep beasting it and keep doing sessions and doing extra things and this, that and the other, there will be an impact on your health. That's for sure, at some point. So I've put a little fact sheet together with 10 hormones that I feel probably have the most impact. And this is not, again, just for females, this is for guys as well. And very difficult for anyone, whether they think that they're a super experienced trainer, unless you're having blood tests, intravenous, I might add, blood tests to measure your particular hormone levels, you don't have a starting point. And so this today is just a general chat about health. And if you want to get more specific, there are companies out there that I could signpost you to that will blood test and then give more specific advice. Do you want to say anything else, Katie?
Yeah, I think that this is just a really good opportunity for people to kind of learn and realize that there's more to hormones than just our sex hormones. It's not just about estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And that so much of what we do on a daily basis influences our hormones, and consequently our hormones influence us in ways that you wouldn't really even begin to understand or associate with that particularly. I think so many things that we just kind of learn to live with on a daily basis, actually, if we become aware of what could be influencing that, that symptom, and actually, we can have a fair amount of control over our own lifestyle, because it's not just diet, it's also a lot will be to do with things like stress and sleep. So yeah, it's just hugely informative, just understanding that there's so much more at play when it comes to hormones and how intricately related that is to our health. It's really cool.
Nice. So you will get this little fact sheet, but basically, so this might be teaching some people how to suck eggs, but hormones are chemical substances. They have so many functions in the body, and each hormone impacts at least one other hormone. So they work in a kind of chain reaction, and the release of these hormones, which is the super important part, we can't control it to the extent where we say, for example, our brain, I want more serotonin, I need to feel better. But there are certain things that we could do and eat and lifestyle and type of training where we could enhance or encourage more serotonin, for example. So timing and quality, unless you are injecting, and usually that would be something synthetic, it is really about understanding and going back to basics. And like Katie said, the key word is awareness. So I've woken up, I'm feeling highly fatigued, I'm not really sure why that is. I can simply track where I am in the day for men or in the month for women and think, potentially it could be because of this. And then I know now that maybe if I eat these specific foods, maybe if I change my lifestyle in these ways, or maybe if I adapt my training, then I can improve things. So some of the one of the guys that I love the most in the training sphere, and Katie knows this organization, he used to write the content for a company called the Charles Poliquin Group. Charles Poliquin died actually last year, sadly, when me and Katie had a conversation in the gym about that, because I felt a bit sad about it. And but he knew quite a lot about where you are holding weight or fat in particular, and why that might be. He was a kind of muscle nerd, but the guy who wrote all the content for the Charles Poliquin Group, it's an American group, is a guy called Luke Lehman, and he is just the ultimate nerd. And now he runs a company, if you wanted to investigate it, called Muscle Nerds. He lives out in Australia, but he's doing a lot of work. And if you ever, he's not cheap. I think it's like $800 for a consultation with him because he's that popular. If you ever wanted to know something specific about you and your health and your body and your training, he is the guru. So the reason I mentioned him, there are people out there, I'm just giving you a general feel, but there are people out there, if you wanted to, you could go or just read on their website what they're doing, etc. So obviously you'll have heard about the endocrine system. That kind of is the network, the motorway network, if you like, with some stop-offs, some service stations of where the hormones are produced and where we see our hormones. If they become tired or overworked, if we have too much or if we have too little, then that's where we may feel an effect and just not feel ourselves or not be able to operate at our optimal function. Okay, so the first hormone is thyroid, and pretty much everybody knows about this. We know that people have thyroid issues. Thyroid kind of determines how well our metabolism is functioning. So the regulation of weight, our energy levels, internal body temperature, how good our skin and hair and nails, etc. are, all will be governed in some way by our thyroid. And the hormones are listed there. Thyroxine, most people will have heard of because that's what people with underactive thyroids will be prescribed. And I've worked with quite a few people with thyroid issues that have not necessarily wanted to take medication or have wanted to reduce medication or have wanted to regulate their weight better even though they're on medication. So what I did was I've just given a little bit of an explanation about hormones and then the types of foods that may help these hormones release naturally or increase the release at the right times, or just promote that hormone in a healthier way. So roasted seaweed, some of these things you might not have heard of, but essentially foods that are rich in iodine. Now, obviously, you can take supplements. You could get a really good multivitamin, and if you wanted some recommendations, because not everything on the shelf is good, then I could give you some recommendations. But we're looking at iodine, and we can have that. A nutritionist always wants you to try and have these things naturally from foods. So kelp is something that you might like to try, roasted seaweed. Then we've got salted nuts. Now, there is no right one prescribed way for nutrition. So if you have high blood pressure, you might want to avoid salted nuts, for example. So everything today is very general. But nuts in themselves will give you a good amount of selenium. And in particular, Brazil nuts are like king for that. And they're healthy plant-based fats as well. So we'll be coming on to why that's super useful. Fish, in particular, oily fish, yogurt, fresh eggs. I always get asked this question, when it comes to organic, I would suggest buying organic for eggs and dairy where you can. And again, I'll answer that question of why later. So if we move along to insulin and glucagon are very, very interesting. Insulin you'll probably have heard of because of diabetes, and my previous employment was looking at diabetes and reducing, actually putting diabetes into remission, because type 2 diabetes, you can't reverse it because that would mean that it's gone away forever, but you can put it into remission so that you're living at a normal range, and you can reduce metformin, which is the #1 medication for diabetes, and you can live a really healthy life. In particular for training, as you'll see later, these two are really, really key. Katie, if I'm talking too much, then just
no, you go for it.
Dip in. Okay, so most people know, actually some people don't, they'll say to me, why do we need a pancreas? Okay, that's the organ that is responsible for releasing insulin. I've got some really good videos, and those who came to the carbohydrate little workshop I did will have seen one of my videos, and I'm happy to pass that on. It's just an animation and it shows you what's happening. So basically, when you consume any food, in particular carbohydrate, whether it's simple or complex, that food will turn into glucose. So people say blood sugar, that's not necessarily correct. Glucose is our energy source. I don't just mean energy for running up to the shop or, you know, getting a quick surge of energy because a tiger is chasing you or something like that. But it's our energy source for any cell in the body, brain cells, muscular cells, anything that requires a cell, which is every single thing in our body. We need energy to feed that cell. So in a healthy individual who eats a balanced, well-measured portion diet, the insulin will hang around at the edge of the cell. Sorry, the glucose will hang around at the edge of the cell, and there will be a message sent to the brain to say, could you inform the pancreas that we need to release insulin? Insulin is the key that opens the door to the cell that allows the glucose to go inside. If insulin is overworked and has decided that it just can't do any more, it essentially doesn't open the cell door. So then we have floating glucose in the bloodstream, and we have floating insulin in the bloodstream. Hyperinsulinemia is where we have too much insulin in the bloodstream. It's probably the prerequisite for every single serious disease that we have in this country, bar coronavirus. It has nothing to do with that. But high blood pressure, high triglycerides, so high cholesterol, heart disease, so heart attack, stroke, etc., anything blocked anywhere is to do with glucose and usually floating amounts of insulin. So we want to try and keep that regulated, and that is pretty simple. I've put on the fact sheet about the foods that will help you do that. But really, it's not about omitting carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are necessary to keep us healthy in so many ways. But you want to choose good portions, lower glycemic index, and if you want me to explain what that is or what those foods are, I can, and carbohydrates that offer us some fiber at the same time. And people don't eat enough fiber in this country. In fact, we probably don't even eat a third of the amount of fiber that we require daily. And then stay away from highly processed foods for most of the time, because balance in life is everything, and it would be boring just to eat in a specific way all of the time. So glucagon then acts in a mirror way to insulin. And so it comes out, there's a message, and it will come out when our glucose levels are low, which would be significant for people that do CrossFit, because you're helping your insulin system when you train, because when you train, your glucose will suck into the muscle like a sponge. And we can give the insulin a rest because it doesn't need to come out and open the cell door. It will just suck into the muscle because the muscle wants it. The muscle is very greedy during and after training. So glucagon will say to the liver, you've been storing some glucose for those just in case moments, and I now need you to release it into the bloodstream. So we want a really good balance between the two hormones, insulin and glucagon. It also has an impact on cortisol, which we're coming to. And again, cortisol will stimulate glucose. So in essence, what we can say is that insulin could be seen as anabolic. An anabolic allows the glucose to go into the muscle, and that means that the muscle then grows. So anabolic is muscle growth, and on the flip side of that, it's catabolic if it's eating at your muscle. So imagine you're in a hospital bed, you haven't been doing any movement for a while. The body will utilize the muscle first because it's safer to do that rather than feed off your fat stores, because it wants you to survive, and those fat stores are essential. So any questions so far about thyroid, insulin, or glucagon?
I think a big one is about understanding the carbs thing, because there's so much. I think that's where there's so much either misinformation or slightly biased information that comes from all these different sources about carbs, and different diet programs will suggest different things, or they'll give particular foods a certain number of points that doesn't make sense. And I think the big thing is understanding that all of this is just really based in the concept of eating whole, real foods that have been as minimally processed or touched by man as possible.
Yeah, so if we look at, quite conveniently for me, CrossFit I don't know if it's actually CrossFit or if it's Ben Bergeron. For those who don't know who he is, he's like one of the lead trainers. He used to train Matt Fraser. He trains Catherine David's daughter now, plus Brooke Wells, I think, and a few other guys. He's a really interesting guy. He's got an amazing podcast that sometimes he's talking about facilities, so it's good for Katie. Sometimes he's talking about the management of facilities because he's got 3 or 4 facilities himself. He's a businessman. He has shares or part ownership in Noble, the trainer and clothing facility, but Katie probably knows more about him than me. But he has the same nutrition philosophy that I do. I don't know if it's him or CrossFit, but there's basically a sentence about eat real food, mainly plants, not too much. It might be in a different order, but in essence,
it is exactly, eat real food, lean meat and fish, plants, some nuts and seeds, and no sugar at all.
Yeah,
that's pretty much it. Yeah,
and that's it. So he would say, and he's my guru, and I agree that cutting out any macronutrient in the short term is giving you a calorie deficit. So in the short term, all these diet plans and everything you will see a weight loss because you're cutting out a food group, therefore you're cutting calories. And that's all it is. There's also research to suggest that heavily reducing or cutting out carbohydrate will then encourage you to utilize fat in your fat stores. Again, if you understand the research, in the short term, yes. So it is a prescribed dietary approach for people who are diabetic. In the short term, it will heavily reduce your HbA1c, which is the blood measure for diabetes. It's HbA1c is way more reliable than the finger prick daily test to measure levels. So in the short term, yeah, but you need carbohydrate for your brain even to function. You'll get brain fog, you'll feel fatigued, you can be irritable, you can impact the rest of your hormonal structure because carbohydrate encourage healthy hormone function. But it's about how much. So we spoke about this on the carb day. A portion for most people, and I'm not talking about some 7-foot professional, I don't know, American football player. I'm talking about general health portion of carbohydrate would fit into a cupped hand per meal. Unless you are heavily training, men can increase that also, generally because they have more muscle mass and are usually bigger than females. But a portion is not what we are consuming in the West. So when you get a plate of pasta, your carbohydrate portions in that plate will more likely be 4 times what you require. And then there's the issue of, well, if I'm not using it, where is it going? And that's where we have the problem. If I'm eating too much of the wrong type, which is flying into my bloodstream like faster than Usain Bolt, it's raising my blood sugar levels really quickly. Insulin's going crazy because it has to get an army out now to try and get to the cells to open the door. There's too much going on, and we are eventually going to tire out the insulin, and it needs a holiday. So the first thing is the right portion. The second thing is, if you eat whole grains, whole wheat, if you don't have an issue with wheat, then that's going to be much slower to digest. Therefore, the insulin doesn't have to race. It can just take its time, mosey on across, open the door, let it in. Plus, it's fibrous, so there's certain things that happen in the gut during that time, and certain things that fiber helps absorb. Great function. So you want whole grains, you want real, and you want to avoid processed foods. So most people don't necessarily understand how much processed food they're eating. Anything that comes in a package is processed. Unless you grow it on your own land and pick it or kill it on your own land, it's processed because it's gone through a factory into packaging into the supermarket. Okay, with the exception of some real good quality butchers and some great farmers markets where you go and pick your own stuff and bag it up yourself and whatever. So it's just being mindful of the types of carbohydrates.
And people very much get stuck into habit and association of particular food items with particular meals. So you almost get blinded to what your other options are. You know, I think one of the issues is, you know, you say carbohydrate to people, and I guarantee you they're automatically thinking about bread and pasta or donuts, but they're not thinking about why you don't want to maybe have them as often, or what could you have instead. And the portion size thing is huge. I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I grew up in a household, well, when I was much younger, especially with my dad, where if you had dinner, it was piled on top of rice or pasta or had garlic bread on the side. So the majority of the meal, the bulk of it, was one of those highly processed carbs, and that was just how you ate.
I'm just gonna look for a book which, if people have an interest,
FYI guys, that was not Jill farting, just saying.
that wasn't.
Yeah. I so had your back then, Jill.
Wasn't it? Did you think I did a Trump? It was the chair.
Yeah.
So this, what Katie's describing, I don't know if you can see this book, but In Defense of Foods is by Michael Pollan. And like, if you want to understand why we eat the foods that we do, this thing that Katie is talking about is we inherit food habits and food choices from our parents, from our grandparents. This will kind of really make sense. And if you want to ask me to email you like the details of stuff that I show you, so that's a really good one. I'm just looking at what I've got. If you're interested in Ben Bergeron, then he's also got a book, and that is like quite.
I've got that. That's on Audible at the moment, so I try to listen to audiobooks because I don't have time to read these days. And that's an excellent one. That's on there as well.
What's that one called, Jill? Sorry.
Chasing Excellence.
Chasing Excellence with Ben Bergeron.
We can put these in the notes.
You had this in your car.
Yeah, I was listening to it in the car.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite activities, so when I do the Whole30 kind of activity with people, one of my favorite thought-provoking things to get people to consider is, you know, if I said the word breakfast to you, what foods automatically pop into your head? And the majority of people say things like cereal, toast, or porridge. And so I'll say, well, what if I just ask you for meal number one? What could meal number one today be? If we stop calling it breakfast and clouding our judgment and our decisions with habit, how could we change our approach to how we fuel ourselves?
Well, this is the really funny thing about every nation is the same, by the way. It's not just like the Brits or the Americans or whatever. It's like we have certain things that we class you know, that are suitable for our meals. You can have your breakfast at 10 p.m. at night. You could have your lunch at 7 o'clock in the morning, and you could have your dinner at 12 noon. It doesn't matter. And if people got out of the habit, particularly with breakfast, like Katie has said, and choose some different options, then essentially you would be promoting health.
Absolutely ridiculous, but when I was on my most top form, consistent with my nutrition, this was pre-children, by the way, I would regularly have salads for breakfast because they're quick and easy to put together.
Well, essentially, with every single meal you have, you should try and have some veggies and leaves. So even if you're having poached eggs on toast, you should grab a handful of leaves or some broccoli or whatever it might be and shove it on there. Mainly when you eat good macronutrients, which are your proteins, carbs, and fats, you can absorb your micronutrients, which are your vitamins and minerals, much better if you have them all together. Way better than having a supplement. So it's a pretty tricky thing to make sure you're getting the right things at the right times, etc. But essentially just look in the fridge, what have I got? Massive handful, shove it on. I am posting recipes with suggestions every day on the group that I've set up for nutrition. I'll tell you about that at the end. It's quite a nice little group so far. People are like chipping in and saying how they feel in the morning and what did they eat for lunch, for example. So it's like quite general. I'm not giving specific advice, but you have the option as well to message me privately through that, asking your own questions. So I'll tell you about that at the end. Right, the next one, estrogen. Men have this as well. It's our female sex hormone. Hey?
Especially if they eat too much tofu.
Yes. Well, we know now that men are more estrogenic because they're developing boobs, moobs. That's the telltale sign when men have too much estrogen in their system. So women can have too much testosterone. Usually it has to be a synthetic.
I heard that.
He's got the stairs.
Usually if women want to get too much testosterone, then it's got to be a synthetic way, i.e. injecting it into you. But you'll still notice and you'll know that when women are doing maybe steroids, for example, they develop an Adam's apple, their sex organs can change, and the reason for them doing that is because they want muscle mass, unless they're doing some, I've just thought they might be doing some kind of gender change, but let's not go into that. But one of the most interesting things that I'm looking into at the moment, because I predominantly work with females of a certain age that are experiencing the same types of symptoms. So excess estrogen, we've got here the risk of breast cancer, uterine cancer, depression, moodiness. But low estrogen, acne, skin lesions, thinning, hair loss. So you've got to try and get the right type of balance. This will be something, estrogen and progesterone will be something that we look at later, specifically about types of training for women when you've got surges in those hormones or real dips in those hormones. So we will be coming back to this one, but in essence, the foods that will promote healthy estrogen: tofu, flaxseed, sesame seeds, soybeans, hummus and garlic. So most people would say at this point, well, I've heard that, you know, soya milk, etc., isn't that healthy for you. Everything we speak about is always about the quantity and the quality. So there are products out there where we can trace back and we know that that type of farming is not only healthy for the individual but for the environment. And it's all about the quantity. If you're going to Starbucks and having 4 soy lattes a day, you're having it in excess. If you're adding it to your diet and having a latte or a cappuccino, a soy cappuccino first thing in the morning, we'll talk about estrogen and the gut later, and how caffeine, for example, will be affected with coffee first thing in the morning. But anyway, so yeah, just giving you these basics at the moment. These are the foods that will encourage healthy estrogen levels.
Jill, I'm wondering if maybe there's a good kind of another topic to go separately onto in another session, looking at getting adequate amounts of macronutrients for vegetarians and vegans in a training environment. Because one of my main concerns with people who eat a vegetarian or a vegan diet is those who are heavily reliant on the pre-made food alternatives, which are very high and obviously highly processed bullshit crap anyway, but also are going to be very high in things like tofu, hummus, soybeans, just those bean alternatives, and therefore they're probably taking on far too much of our estrogen producing food alternatives. But I think a lot of people don't really know how else they can get the nutrients that they need to be, because I think, you know, for me especially, I'm always wary that the automatic is to turn to, you know, the alternatives, the tofu, the fake meatballs and chicken pieces and all that jazz, and consuming so much of that actually might be a little bit more detrimental than you'd like to think.
It does go back to how processed the food is. So there is plain tofu, completely plain. You have to cook it up, add spices, manipulate it yourself if you like. That would still be classed as processed 1. It's definitely not processed 2 or 3, because there's levels now. But then you've got tofu products which are like, you know, the fake steaks or the fake spag bol or whatever, and it always puzzles me, like, why would somebody that's veggie or vegan want to eat something that tastes like meat anyway? But anyway, I won't judge. So there are limited processed options for veggies, but definitely, like, we could go into what's best for them. I like, hats off to people who are vegan, you know, because I do have a massive love for animals myself and the environment. But you know, a veggie diet, or a diet that includes eggs, or a diet that includes fish sometimes, is a really, really healthy place to be. But you have to work harder to get, in particular, the amino acids that you need.
I think it would be really good to give people who choose to eat that way, and again, for ethical reasons, for the most part, I'm sure the majority of people do that, just a little bit more tool and support to put together as many food combinations as they can to really support health and training in an optimal training environment. But that's one I get people ask me all the time, you know, especially if we do a Whole30, how do I do the Whole30 as a vegetarian or a vegan? And I'm like, well, it's going to be tricky. You can.
There's loads of myths about that as well, because, for example, Arnold Schwarzenegger's a vegetarian.
Well, he is now.
He might inject a few things here and there, who knows, never proven. But there's lots of athletes out there that are vegetarian, and they look like freaking gods. So it's possible, but it's more difficult.
I would always question their supplementation, though. I would. That's why I struggle with some of the documentaries that have been coming out, because of their production values and the companies who've been putting them together. And you just don't know the whole backstory. And some of these guys who are saying that, you know, they're vegetarian or vegan and they're at the peak of their athleticism, and I was like, I would love to see what shakes and tablets and other things that they're putting in their bodies to help facilitate that muscle growth, because there's only so much you can do to cheat science and biology.
Yep. Well, we'll be coming on to the main one for number 10 for what they're probably having, allegedly. So for progesterone, again, produced in the ovaries, heavily associated with pregnancy, but throughout our cycle, it surges, it dips, it surges, it dips. And again, when we come on to the topic of female hormones and how that affects training, etc., we'll be looking at that. So very quickly, there's a list of foods there also. Prolactin, I'm just going to skip over it because whilst it does have some form of impact, it's not the most important. So
hey, moving on to female over here.
Hey, yeah, I know. Well, for you, yeah.
We'll in the Zoom room.
you can have a private consult about your prolactin levels. So testosterone, we know that is a male sex hormone, but females have it too. Interestingly, because of the question that Sam was asking earlier, I've got a few of my old university books out, and I was having a little read. And our bodies can change things when they want to. So we have androgens, and those androgens can turn into estrogen. Testosterone is an androgen, so when we need to, we can turn that into estrogen. So if that just like I reread that, I just thought, oh, the body and how incredibly complex it is and clever is just unbelievable. Except we don't know how to fight coronavirus at the moment, but it's coming. So we know, everyone will know that testosterone has an impact on muscle. So some females will have more testosterone than others. Some females will have less, some males will have more than others. And again, because we're only looking generally and without doing blood testing, these are recommendations with regards to food, and later we look at training just to keep you more healthy or give you a fighting chance to have good levels. It's anabolic, testosterone, which is why we kind of associate steroids with being anabolic. We know they're anabolic steroids. Anabolic, again, it just means muscle growth. So we know it's important for bodybuilding. It's super important for CrossFit, which we'll come to. And it does start reducing, depending on what literature you look at. In men, it can start reducing even in the 20s, like 23, 27, it starts to come down and reduce. Unless you are promoting health and healthier hormone function, you can keep it fairly level, but you know, let's make no bones about it, a 99-year-old is going to have very, very different levels to a 19-year-old. So you've got what you've got, and you'll get different training benefits. Remembering that one kind of works against the other. So if you're trying to build muscle, but you're doing tons or too much training, the wrong type of training, or loads of endurance training, you're going to really struggle with what wants to happen in your own body. So that again is one of the hormones that we know about. There's more information about that.
I think it would be really good for the guys to understand, because I know it's mostly women on this call at the moment, but you know, doing a separate session where we look at female hormones and training and then male hormones and training a lot of the guys in the gym aren't necessarily going to understand how much of a role their testosterone levels and or their age and how their testosterone levels are changing impacts them, their training, their physique, their, you know, everything about their training. As much as we're affected by our cycles over the month, that guys are affected over the course of a day, as Jill's been saying, there's that difference between them, but also as they age and change and having to adapt to that. But first of all, actually understanding that, you know, yeah, so if you're feeling crap, it could actually be, you're not just having a bad day because you didn't get any sleep. Maybe there's something else under the surface, and just some awareness.
And I just remembered now why I went off on a tangent about Charles Poliquin and Luke Lehman, because probably people are sitting there thinking, what's she talking about? And I've just remembered, the penny's just dropped. So Luke Lehman is just all about the least possible amount of training that you can do for your optimal health or to reach your goal. And way too many people just overdo the wrong type of thing. You can get the same benefits from sensibly training a couple, 3-4 times a week than you can, as we know, some people are doing double sessions multiple times a week, training a few times a day, and age is everything for that.
Oh yeah.
So very individual. Again, you would have to measure through blood testing for the individual. You couldn't just say this is the best way to do it, because it depends. But a lot of people will say they hold fat in certain areas on the body, or they find it difficult to reduce fat in certain areas on the body, and pretty much it all boils down to hormonal function, hormonal health, and the amount of training that people are doing. So we know, and this comes from the Poliquin, but loads of other research as well, that holding more fat around your abdominal area, which is again more dangerous because that's where your internal organs are, is usually higher cortisol levels due to stress, lack of sleep, overtraining. And so if you start balancing things a bit better, people usually find they then start reducing fat from that particular area. So yeah, everyone all right so far?
I mean, I think this is difficult, isn't it? Because it opens up so many doorways,
I know,
so many big conversations. And I think just remembering that this is like an introduction, and then hopefully this will be a jumping off point for people to say, actually, do you know what? I would love to go down the rabbit hole a little bit deeper in this particular area. And then that's where we can start to flesh out some much more specific, more in-depth discussions in these different areas.
I think our conversation, Katie, as well, was just like, we can't assume that people know anything about these hormones. They're not necessarily things that are covered in school unless you specialize in these areas, or you've had particular health concerns and you know a little bit about one or more of these hormones. So this is just like a little introduction. And again, it might mean going away, having a reread, just seeing where things might fit together, which is actually coming later. So this is just the basis, like what are the hormones doing, where do they come from, what's their purpose, and then we'll look at training and stuff a little bit later.
I think this next one's going to be a really interesting one for a lot of people.
Yeah, so serotonin is like the gold bullion of hormones, but it has a direct effect on training and results as well. So learning memory, regulating sleep, healthy digestion, mood, and muscular functions. There is pretty much a trend where the balance of serotonin in humans is just getting all off whack. And the years that we go through, things seem to just be going like, I don't know, there's more depression, there's more anxiety, there's more mental health issues. And again, if you're interested in this specific area, the guy who kind of knows the most, and again, I've got another book.
I mean, straight away, I can see some of these symptoms of low serotonin are going to be ticking a lot of boxes for people at the moment.
Basically, everybody in the Western world.
Yeah.
And mainly people who live in countries with crap weather. But this guy, Patrick Holford, and I'll get the details if you're interested in this. He has an institute, I think it's called Optimal Nutrition or something like that, in London. He runs a lot of diplomas, certifications and stuff for nutritionists and dietitians. He's like the gold standard for nutritional therapy. But basically this book goes through all of the disorders that we have with regards to anxiety and stress and low self-esteem and mental health issues, everything up to like severe paranoid schizophrenia. And he has an institute. He works with a lot of patients, writes books, he does TED Talks, and he runs these certifications and stuff. So he is really well respected in the industry. I'm trying just to give you people that are well respected because there's too much crap on Google, basically. So that's very interesting. You know, we'll come on to serotonin in a second, but for mood, I'll come on to some vitamins in a minute. Anyway, so food's there, and there is a bit of a pattern. You'll start to see the same foods that come up for different things. So it shouldn't be too difficult if you like printed this off or made a list once you've got it to say what things am I having or what things am I not having. And then you can just go, do you know what? Well, what kind of recipes could I put together? If you need help, I can help you. But yeah, serotonin and mood, I mean, that again could be a dopamine as well, could be a separate topic, just on its own. Could be a whole hour just on its own. So yeah, so moving on, cortisol, and most people know about cortisol, produced in the adrenal gland. The reason that it's important to understand is because when we're training, we're burning cortisol. You want a certain amount of cortisol before you start training. So adrenaline and cortisol, if you imagine back in the day when we lived in caves, we would rest for most of the day, a bit like how dogs live. We'd rest for most of the day, but when we needed to, either for safety or when hunting, cortisol and adrenaline would come out. So if you opened your front door and a tiger starts chasing you down the street, you go into fight or flight because your cortisol and adrenaline have kicked in. So we need it. So cortisol can be catabolic. It can break down muscle, which is either a good or a bad thing, depending on what type of activity you're doing. And then there's different synthetic forms of cortisol as well. So there's some foods there. I'm not sure where Katie is because we don't seem to be.
She's there.
We're not moving through on the old list. But anyway, you'll get. Go on. There we go. Yeah. So cortisol is known as the stress hormone, which doesn't mean that it's a negative thing. We need it, but we want it to come out and then go back to bed. And the issue we have when we have high stress, because our lives now are technology, there's too much information that we always have to process. We're working, your parents, we've got this coronavirus that leaves people feeling, and when we're operating on these high stress levels all the time, then we're really putting our system under stress, and cortisol is highly detrimental to the system. So you want it to come out when you're just about to start training, and then you need it to come back down again. So a really simple way of doing that is have some caffeine just before you're about to train. However, if you do endurance, that's going to have a detrimental effect, because the caffeine will kick in around 20 minutes after you've had it, and then it will dip down a little bit like blood glucose. It goes whoosh and then comes back down, unless you're eating a low GI food. So what you want to do is psychologically be able to control your body and understand your body to say, I'm just about to train, so it knows that that cortisol's coming. And then as soon as you've done your training, you could have some orange juice, and that naturally brings your cortisol levels back down. I'm really guilty of this as well, because I love coffee, particularly love the coffee at the box now, that I'll train and then go, I'll have a coffee because it's a social thing. That's not the right thing to do. So in a nutshell, don't do as I do.
Lynn, don't ruin my coffee sales. Shush you.
Yeah, before is great. And just remember that if people then start requesting like maybe an oat milk, because it'll be lower GI, or a soy milk now and again, it's going to have a health benefit. So there we go. Luckily, dark chocolate features a lot on all of these lists, which I'm very happy about, but just remember that it should be high percentage cacao and not just like fake dark chocolate that you buy from the newsagent type thing.
Not Bourneville.
No. Adrenaline, so we've just kind of covered this a little bit as well. Again, it's like an emergency hormone. Quick, something's happening, stressful situation, I need to get my human to safety. So fight or flight, and it will increase blood pressure. So people who have hypertension need to be particularly careful, although they're taking synthetic substances in order to widen the artery or thin the blood to allow it to go through, so that they're able to get on and have stressful situations in their life without having a heart attack. So again, this is related to glucose, insulin, and glucagon. So have a read through this, and there's a list of foods there. And the final one, because I'm aware we've been on now for like an hour, is growth hormone. So I often joke to Katie that she should stock this in the box and we should all have it. If you're over 35, there are so many studies about growth hormone and how it's anti-aging. Some people just take it because it's anti-aging. You can go to doctors, private doctors, and have blood tests and see if this is something that might help you, etc. It's abused in the sports world because people use it to gain unfair advantage, because it basically means that you recover super quickly after training. So there are ways to naturally encourage human growth hormone. And again, maybe when we're talking about like amino acids, testosterone, we can look at growth hormone. But not only will it encourage the muscle to grow, but the recovery factor from it is like second to none. It's not something I've ever had. I asked another nutritionist what he thought, and would it be a useful social experiment, you know, to have a look and see how it benefits. And he actually, it's someone that you would know the people that he works with in the CrossFit world. But you know, there are health benefits to it, but again, it would need to be from a reputable source. You would need to see a specialist. If you're over 35, it's to try and balance things out a little bit better. So yeah, if you have a look at the little section I've got in blue here, so we've got testosterone, growth hormone, in order to strengthen, stimulate muscle growth. So cortisol, adrenaline, and glucagon increase the availability of glucose. So this is really good. If your system is running on like full steam ahead, everything's operating as it should, everything's in balance, the moment your glucose levels get a little bit lower during a training, the right messages go to the right places, the liver releases excess, you get it straight into the muscle, and that's like the best cycle you could hope for. The problem is when insulin's not working properly, it's not opening the cells, the message system isn't working properly, glucagon isn't working, the liver's not releasing what it should, or it's releasing too much. So if you're a chronic bad sleeper or someone that suffers from chronic stress all the time, then essentially your liver could just keep picking out more glucose into the bloodstream, more glucose into the bloodstream. Then you've got excess glucose, you're not using it, and now you've got excess insulin because it has to get involved. So it is just trying to create the perfect specimen, of which there isn't one. So I've put now how to look at some really simple things to do with your diet. You want to be as anabolic as possible naturally. You don't want to be eating into your muscle for fuel. You can think about what you eat before, during, and after training. So before and during exercise, the right types of carbs can minimize the increase in cortisol, the stress hormone. We also want to have a look at our testosterone levels. Once you stop exercising, testosterone levels go right down. So you can, and I'm going to say can and may, because this doesn't work for everybody. It's not something that I find necessary, and I wouldn't recommend my private clients to consume protein necessarily straight after a workout. But there is some research. I put it here because I like to be quite balanced and let people work things out for themselves. Some people have a protein shake or something straight after exercise. If you have anything in liquid form, it's going to go into your system tons quicker than if you eat something. So even if you liquidize a turkey breast and had it with some milk in a drink, it's going to go into your system really quickly. Cortisol reducing supplements, forget them, they're expensive. There's not that much research to support what they do. Not too low in fat or high in protein. So it's interesting that humans don't need that much protein, even if you're training. We eat a lot. So if you imagine, like I said about a cupped hand of carbs, a palm is probably about the portion that you would need per meal for protein. Just a palm. Maybe a little bit more if you're doing more training. But it equates to a chicken breast, a turkey breast, maybe 2 to 3 eggs. You know, there's veggie options as well. So you just look at your palm of your hand and think that's what you need. For men, the government recommend 55 grams per day, and for women 45 grams per day. that's not the gram value for the food type, that's the gram value for the protein that's in that particular food, because in protein there's a lot of water as well. So it says here, some experts endorse diets comprised of 40% protein. There's little evidence. Protein is not stored by the body. It's the only macronutrient that isn't. So if your body doesn't need it because it's had enough that day, you'll just, it's expelled through waste. So if you are drinking a protein shake, it's like 80 grams of protein per serving. That's just ridiculous, because after about 16 grams, the body can't really take any more, and it just gets rid of the rest anyway. Creatine is interesting. So creatine, there was always a bit of a question mark around it, but saying that, I was listening to a really good podcast in the week from another guy who does a lot of nutrition for CrossFit, who was saying that creatine may help people lose their gains.
Oh.
So it may, but again, it's the quality and the amount of the creatine. It's a supplement. It's not something I take. It's not something I would advise for general health. But if people are doing loads more training and maybe competing at a better level, then that's something they might want to consider. And zinc. So we'll look at some foods that are good for zinc. Just make a note of that. So I don't know if Katie kind of wants to talk about the workout side of this. Just so you're aware that I am a qualified PT. I'm not qualified in CrossFit, but that was how I started out really, and I was a teacher by trade for physical education. But I feel like I've been out of this game, apart from my own personal training, for about 5 years, and I don't think I should be necessarily advising people when it's not my forte anymore. So I might leave this little bit to Katie just to comment on maybe.
I could just do a little blurb. I mean, I could talk all day about this, but we could maybe do this as a separate little, I'm thinking about just doing some podcasty things anyway. And this might be one. I think it's something that people need to know and understand a little bit. And it kind of links back to what Jill was saying earlier about, there's the concept of overtraining. And I think a lot of people kind of laugh that off, especially if they're younger. Like, oh, no such thing. I can do loads. I feel great. But overtraining can really be an umbrella phrase for inappropriately training for you, or not understanding optimal training, variety and variation that would suit your goals. So, the number one priority in anything that I do at CrossFit Lutterworth for you guys is getting you to understand what supports you individually, personally, for your health, well-being, and for your goals, because everybody's goals are different. So Sam's athleticism goals are potentially going to be very different from my athleticism goals right now. So the training regime that I would recommend would potentially be a little bit different, but also Sam and I are very different people on lots of different levels when it comes to how we might train and other factors we've got to involve in that. One of the reasons why the CrossFit methodology programs the way that it does, constantly varied, functional fitness, pretty much always working at high intensity with rests, right? You know that's pretty much what we do on a regular basis, and we switch that between very short duration, medium length, long duration workouts, because the intensity that can go along with a 3-minute workout is very different from the intensity that you can put into a 30-minute workout. And those all work different metabolic pathways and will help you create different, effects on your physique. If someone wants to bulk up, the worst thing they can do is a bunch of 60-minute fucking AMRAPs and EMOMs, because that's not going to help you build muscle mass. You can't really bulk and cut at the same time. It's just not possible. The havoc that would wreak on your body would be insane, and you just wouldn't get anywhere. You'd get frustrated because you can't do both at the same time. You'd know, and you know, I don't prescribe to exercise methodology in terms of bodybuilding and physique shows. That's not something that I've spent any time or desire exploring or facilitating, because that's what CrossFit does not do for my clients. You know, I don't do that for you guys. But if you follow what they do, what they bulk and then they cut. It's two separate processes. You know, if you are someone, especially guys, a lot of guys come into the CrossFit gym and they're like, I'd really like to put on some more muscle. Cool, here's what you need to do. Rein back the intensity on some of the longer stuff and lift a little bit heavier in the workouts. And it can be that simple. But going on and doing, you know, CJ bless him with his hour-long extra everything every day, that's not going to help him get any extra muscle.
Mm.
And also,
he'll always have that little bit of belly button fat.
And also, as he gets older, that's going to become more and more detrimental.
Yeah, and it's not sustainable. And there will be other negative side effects that start to come from that, which I think the worst part for me with people not understanding the effect that has is, you know, if we're starting to really increase our cortisol levels, or if people get into something called adrenal fatigue, it's just going to ruin your love for training and you're going to give up. But you don't have to. You know, it never has to get to that point if you understand the training variance and methodology and why we keep it as constantly varied as we do. And actually, going back, Jill, to what you were saying before, that often less is more, especially if you're tackling the workout with the appropriate level of intensity, with the appropriate amount of rest in between. You don't need to have 2 hours of beasting every session to continue to improve your health and fitness levels. You know, and that's a huge thing that a lot of people just don't quite get. So I would be happy to do some sort of podcasty chat thing about that in another separate session. I think that would be really cool, especially if people had any questions about, you know, so, you know, why is this how CrossFit programs, what are the effects of this? How can I carry on working towards my specific goals? Because really, no matter what your goals are, you could come and train CrossFit 5 days a week and you're going to get closer to your goals. Depending on what your goals are, you might need to do a little something extra, maybe a couple sessions a week, some accessory work, or I might need to tell you to tailor how you tackle particular workouts when they come up, depending on what your goals are. But that's a conversation that I can have with people and empower you to have the knowledge and understanding of how you're going to tackle what is put in front of you at the box. Or maybe you need to do a little bit extra here or there, or actually maybe you need to do a little bit less.
And I think on that kind of note, and looking at aesthetics and stage stuff and bodybuilding and all the rest of it, I've spoken to Katie about getting my friend who's a nutritionist to come and speak about this, because she has not only personal first-hand knowledge of the industry, she used to do a lot of programming for particularly women who were going through that. That was their goal, basically, to get super lean, low body fat, ripped, whatever. And she's completely like 360 now, like some 10 years on. She had a lot of health issues herself. She knows people that have had health issues, and she knows all about the drug abuse and whatnot. So it's just something interesting as a topic, which would be good to get her to come on and speak about.
So I mean, I think, Jill, maybe from here we can hi Steve. I think we've got a lot of potential content for more specific discussions. So I'm just thinking, because we've been going on for a little while, and I'm just conscious that I don't want to go on too far. If we have just any questions about just the overview on hormones, and then if we offer for people to give us some suggested topics to go down that rabbit hole with, and then we can post this up to everybody else, and then get planning for our next more focused session. Because again, I think between Jill and I think this will be the problem. We could probably go on for a very long time about all these things. So yeah, so Kay and Paul, Sam, Snotface, have you got anything that popped out that you would like to explore in more depth, or that you found interesting or that was very useful to you. Or don't worry if any of this went over your head too, because it's a lot of information to process. That's why I go back and have a look at the notes, and especially look at the side effects that having, less of or not enough of these hormones or imbalance of these hormones, because then that might help you to kind of assimilate it a little bit more and then be able to ask some more specific questions about anything that you think you might be struggling with.
It's definitely all very interesting and mind-blowing. Maybe slightly confused on some of the stuff, but I suppose with reading all of that fact sheet again properly, in my own time, then but it's great. Really, really good. Really enjoyed that. I could carry on listening to it, to be honest, but
I was trying to work out, like, when I first qualified in fitness was like 1996 or something like that, when I first did my YMCA exercise to music, and I'm still confused by all of this because it's science and every year there's new research, otherwise we wouldn't develop as a species. And for every piece of research that comes out, you'll find 10 that disagree with that particular theory. And it is confusing, but it's just about trying to move away from general. I know that's what we were doing today, just to give people a bit of an idea, and just look at you specifically and just try and work out what you think. And you can ask questions, what you think is truth for you.
Well,
Can I say something? I tried, creatine, the supplement, the powder. So I've taken that and it made me very ill to the point of me ending up in hospital. And I lost about just over a stone in 9 days because it absolutely killed my pancreas.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally took not even the full portion. So it was like a half scoop over probably about 8 weeks. And it made, because my body is quite sensitive and I know that's why I took the half scoop. And oh my God, that was it. I threw it in the bin. I was so poorly.
Yeah, so just going back to what I said, it's not something that I prescribe or recommend. But there's a lot of research out there to say how beneficial it is. So it's an individual thing, and I would only probably go down that route having been advised by a specialist. Because
the other issue,
why would you take a supplement unless you knew what your current levels were, or you completely understood your own recovery rate? Essentially, you could be overdosing on something when you don't need it. It's like telling someone to go away and have loads of vitamin D when they live in a sunny, hot country and they don't need it. So if you're overdosing because you don't know your starting levels, your measures, that's the main issue.
I think for me as well, supplementation, there's such a lack of quality control of where it's produced and what's actually in it. The industry standards for actually publishing on the labels exactly what's in it is shockingly loose. You could be getting in your protein powder, it might have 3 ingredients in it, but actually there might be more like 10 or 12, but they don't have to let you know that those other things are in there because they're under a certain volume. They don't have to report an ingredient if it's less than a certain amount of volume, but you probably still want to know what the hell's in there. And also, if this stuff's made in a factory in China that makes something else and there's cross-contamination, you just don't know. I'm very wary of where I get any supplements from. It's one of the reasons why I've only ever really stocked and used the Amsport brand, because it's all very closely monitored in a factory in Germany by biochemists who are also high-performance athletes. So I know the quality, I know the ethos, and I've that, so I can guarantee that. But supplements is such a dark deep hole to go down.
Katie, not only that, but there's a study recently in the States about supplements for athletes for various enhancement improvement, supposed to be completely legal, and when they tested, a large proportion of them had banned substances in them,
Well, and
And
some of these games athletes that are getting called out on their drug tests, they're all like, I've been taking this supplement for all this time. And I was like, yeah, well, your supplement probably had that shit in there. Because you just can't guarantee it.
Yeah.
Kay and Paul, did you guys have anything?
I'm just trying to absorb it all.
Don't worry, because if you later today or tomorrow, if you go, oh, I want to ask about that, just drop us a message, because you're going to need some decompression time.
I love listening to it all and taking it all in. I can't think of anything at the minute specific that I want to know more about. I feel like I want to know everything. So.
Me too. I think like it's really funny because you've got, people like Luke Lehman and Ben Bergeron will often say they feel like they know less than 5% of what's really going on and happening, and they're the nerds.
Yeah.
So
I would always say, if you ever come across someone who claims to know absolutely everything about any of these topics, steer clear, because it's complete bullshit. The underlying methodology for exercise, right? Exercise physiology, that really hasn't changed much in the last 50 years, right? So exercise programs, all the new stuff that gets published is based on old stuff that's existed for decades already. They've just called it something new. They made it look a little fancier or whatever, or they're wearing a leotard. I don't know. But nutrition, the science behind that, our methodology is improving. The technology we have at our disposal is improving. At the same time, our food quality is going down. So, even studies that are being done now are going to be different from studies done 30 years ago, because we're different, because we're eating, increasingly nutrient poor foods. So stuff changes all the time. So you'll never know everything, and you always have to continue to research and learn and try to find more knowledge. If anyone says they know it all, then they're charlatans.
Amen.
Cool.
Is Emma still with us?
I think she's getting ready to go to Morrison's before they shut.
Oh.
I'm still listening.
Have you got any questions, Emma?
No, I'm good. I'm good for the minute. In a way, I'm going to read through that fact sheet. Did you say that you're going to send it us?
Yeah, I'll post it up.
Yeah, brilliant. And then, no doubt I'll have some questions after that. Thank you.
Well, if you're already on my little freebie group, then you can direct message me or just say, look, I was there to listen to the chat today. Can you answer this question?
Yeah.
So, feel free to go through that too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
What I'll do is I'll upload this to YouTube and have subtitles put on, so anyone who wants to watch it afterwards can access that and kind of have it going in the background. So thank you very much, Jill, for putting that together. It's just so much stuff to go through, and it's so interesting. But hopefully you guys will find these really interesting, and we will carry on doing them weekly.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I quickly
See you later, guys.
Facebook group?
Yep.
How do we get onto that Facebook group that you mentioned?
It's not Facebook, it's my little app thing. I sent you an invite.
In an email?
Yeah, you had an email invite, and then you accept the invite.
Right, you need to go ahead and log off. We could just, if you want to hang around and ask any extra questions, you can. Otherwise,
thanks, guys.
you don't have to hang around.
See you later.